The first thing I remember is the sound. Not waves, not wind, but a low, patient hum that seemed to come from beneath the water itself, like a throat clearing in the dark. It grabbed me before I saw it. I was 30 miles off the charted coast, leaning over the rail with a thermos of cold coffee and the kind of tired curiosity that keeps men like me in the sea. We were supposed to be running a routine sonar sweep. Instead, something answered. It looked like a perfect hole in the ocean floor, if looking could be reduced to a shape. A matte black aperture wider than my launch, the water around it pulling in slow, stubborn circles. The surface around the rim frosted with bubbles that popped and vanished like tiny, angry moons. The smell was wrong. Not the clean brine I knew since childhood, but a metallic tang that clung to the back of my throat, a scent that made my tongue tingle. Even before the first sample hit the deck, my chest had gone hollow, as if the sea itself had taken a breath and left me behind. I dove my recorder into the swell, and the audio picked up something like a far-off chorus, layered with the natural groaning of the hull. When I listened later, alone in the cabin, the chorus was somehow inside my head as well, a pattern of clicks and long, whale-like exhalations that arranged themselves into phrases I could not translate. The footage, God help me, showed the hole exactly as I'd seen it, but the depth readers circled randomly and then refused to register anything at all beyond the rim. No profile, no return, as if whatever lay below refused measurement. I came back to shore with footage that made the technicians frown and a sober feeling under my ribs I couldn't explain. That night I slept on the couch at the Institute, the TV an indifferent glow, images of the hole drifting through the static like a magnet. I dreamt of descending stairs made of wet stone. I dreamt of breath on my neck and someone whispering coordinates that weren't numbers, but tastes. Copper, old pennies, the smell of a closed room. Days blurred into another kind of map. I walked the harbor in small circles, fingers tracing the same rivet on my jacket as if it anchored me. Friends texted, asked if I was okay. I typed back clumsy reassurances and erased them. The more I tried to name what I had seen, the more the name slipped, like trying to hold a fish with gloved hands. The image lodged in me with a weight that made me check the tide charts twice, 3 times. Obsession, I told myself. A tired word for a tired man, until the hum began to follow me into empty rooms and the dreams came smelling of iron. I told myself the second trip would be scientific, instruments, redundancy, a team. The truth was uglier. I couldn't shake the way the hole had looked at me, as if it had a circumference and a mind. We left at dawn under a sky that still smelled of rain, the harbor empty of pleasure craft and full of the small, anxious birds that skimmed the water like stitches. The first weird thing was that the gulls kept their distance from the launch, hovering on the wind and watching us with ridiculous, bird-like stillness. Later, a dockhand swore the fish were leaping farther out than they used to, as if the sea itself had learned to avoid a place. Equipment failed in polite patterns. The backup camera jammed precisely when we lowered the probe. The depth sounder spat nonsense like a malfunctioning typewriter. On the feed, there were frames that the recorder refused to save. A single second of black I can still feel when I close my eyes, as if the memory had been excised and left a scar. We snagged a sample on the third drop. Not water, not sediment, but a patch of slimy membrane that clung to the corer like a living coin. It smelled of iron and old linen, and when I opened the container for a breath, the lab tech behind me went pale and said he could hear someone whispering through the metal. The whispering started as a trick of the speakers and then settled into a rhythm I could not ignore. It wasn't language so much as punctuation. Long inhalations, clicking consonants like stones knocking, and an undercurrent hum that matched the pulse I'd first heard. Sometimes the pattern would splice into sounds that belonged to other people's memories. A child's lullaby I recognized from my sister's house, the cadence of a sermon from a church I had never attended. I found fragments of recollection slipping into my mind at odd hours. A hand on wet stone that wasn't mine, a map with ink-smudged edges where the coast should be. The feeling that someone else had been there before me and had been willing to forget grew teeth. On the third night, the crew began to argue quietly, their voices low and sharp like knives. One of them, a man who'd been laughing on the ride out, woke screaming of a staircase and clutches of wet hair. Another swore her watch stopped at the exact hour we first saw the hole and refused to tick again. The ocean around the rim rippled in strange ways, creating illusions of depth that pulled at the eyes and made the horizon shiver. At the rim, the water moved with intent. A small, pale shape floated up and then dissolved into bubbles before anyone could grab it. We logged an anomaly and filed a report, but the entries read like fever, neat words that didn't say what we felt. When I tried to leave, my hands shook so hard I spilled coffee on the manifest. The idea of distance had altered. Returning to shore felt like walking away from a living thing that had wrapped its fingers in my clothes. Obsession had become compulsion. I found myself sketching the rim in the margins of notebooks, tracing its edge until the ink wore through. The voices crept into the spaces between thought, rearranging my memories like a deck being shuffled. I wasn't certain anymore whether I was investigating or being cataloged. In the dead lull between watch shifts, I planned a return, alone with something the sea could not easily swallow. I told myself I would take only enough to prove it: a single tether, a hand camera, a patch of courage sewn together with tape. The sea does not respect bargains. When I slipped over the rim that last time, the world narrowed to the hiss of the hull, the electric whine of the suit, and the immediate, obscene silence that followed like a final curtain. Pressure pressed at my ears as if the ocean itself were a living lung. Light from the lamp slid down the black like a hesitant thought and was swallowed. The rim closed behind me like a lid. The first thing I lost was time. Seconds blended into the shape of seconds until I had no purchase on how long I floated there, staring into the hole's throat. Inside, shadows moved with patient geometry. Arches of darker dark, ridges that suggested bone or architecture, or the ribs of a sunken cathedral. The chorus rose around me, and at first I thought I was hearing the crew, but the voices stitched impossibly through my memories. My father's laugh when I was 6, a woman's voice humming the lullaby I had only ever heard in dreams, a stranger counting in a language that tasted like ash. Each sound tugged at a different corner of me, until I felt as if my life were a coat being unbuttoned. I reached for the tether and found only slack. The line hung limp, as if I were no longer attached to the world above. My lamp traced a surface that wasn't water. Tiny eddies of light curled like smoke, and something moved beneath them with deliberate, slow malice. It was not fish. It did not swim. It observed. As I leaned closer, images flooded me. Not hallucinations, not entirely. They were memories, not mine. Hands scraping at carved stone, a child below yelling without air, someone sewing a seam of skin with a bone needle. I felt the stitches in my own mouth tighten. I understood then, with a clarity that left my teeth aching, that the hole did not simply consume, it taught. Panic rose like a tide. I kicked toward the surface, lungs burning with the clean human need for air, and something grazed my ankle. Cool, patient, like the touch of a hand that remembers an old score. I scrambled, and in the blur, I saw faces inside the dark, not whole, not human, mouths working around syllables that matched the chorus. One face turned toward me with the slow gesture of terrible courtesy and mouthed my name. It sounded like every name I've ever been called, and also like none of them. When I broke the rim and the light of the dawn stabbed my eyes, I thought I had escaped. The crew hauled me aboard and tried to laugh, and I laughed with them because laughter is a useful muscle. My hands, however, remembered another ocean. I woke later on the institute couch with sea salt in my mouth and a note folded in the pocket of my jacket, a single line, written in a hand I could not place. "We are keeping the door warm." I frowned at it, then set it on the table, because people leave notes and survive. There is a weight under my ribcage now, a hollow that clicks when I breathe, as though something has taken up residence and practices singing at night. Sometimes, when the house is still, I can hear it rehearsing the lullaby, and in the intervals I think I hear other voices, patient, cataloging, counting down. I find myself walking to the window and watching the harbor as if waiting for a gesture. I cannot tell whether I am waiting to return or to be collected. It speaks when I am alone, not with words, but with the press of remembered water along the teeth. It is learning my name.
Subscribe to Horror Story Bar.